But let me tell you a brief history of my own track, because I did work on Wall Street until 2003, and until I started to learn about ecological economic principles. We don't value externalities and all the problems with the environment and social equity, and everything I was learning about was like, what the hell am I doing here? And so I've spent the last 10 years figuring out our situation. And, 5 or 6 years ago, I ran a big blog on energy and sustainability, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that I was naive back then, that telling people the truth of our situation would be sufficient for them to then go do the right thing. And I think it's a little more complex than that. And so I just have a very brief talk, maybe 10 minutes, and John is going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to have hopefully an engaging discussion about where we are and the future of our culture and society and this discipline of ecological economics. So real briefly, this is a slide from yesterday. It just indicates, despite the IEA and EIA glowing forecasts, we do have an energy problem, especially with liquid fuels. You can see in the last 12 years, we've grown our global oil supply by 3 million barrels a day, but the cost to the oil companies has gone from $10 to over $100. So we're extracting more energy, but the cost, forget the cost to society, the cost to the energy companies themselves is going up. And the way that they are going to respond to that is the same way that societies have responded to limits to growth, which is credit and debt. And a lot of energy companies are having to go into debt to pay for large capital expenditures. So just one slide on debt. This is a slide on a typical family that has $100,000 in income, and they want to spend a little bit more for whatever reason. So they borrow some money, the credit, the $40,000 blue credit, which is the yellow. And this happens over time, and every year they have to pay a little bit more in interest on the bottom. And the red line is their disposable income. Well, out in year 6, their interest that they owe is such that it's eating up all of the new credit that they've got. Everything seems okay, though. They still have quite a bit of purchasing power until the bank says no more credit. And the difference between year 6 and year 7 is huge. I'm sure you all know maybe people or relatives that are in this situation, but countries, the major countries in the world are in this situation around in year 6, just as a way of backdrop. So in my opinion, and the research that I've done, is the world is trapped from two sides. We have credit system restrictions, and we have resource input contributions. Again, from yesterday, we don't really face resource scarcity, we face resource contribution. Our energy slaves are requiring pay raises, and we've built so much infrastructure and complexity that the trade of applying more and more energy, 1,000 or 5,000 times more energy to replace human labor, is becoming more costly. Actually, we have 3 constraints. The constraint on climate and biodiversity and the impact we're making on the natural world. All 3 of those things are facing us now, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So this is, there are no major policy bodies or institutions that are preparing for anything other than the straight line. The CBO has actually, 2007, 2008, 2009, 10, when economic growth was much less than forecast, they actually kept their forecast for 2020 the same, as if we were going to grow faster in the future. It's just a template. I met with one of the Federal Reserve Board governors, and he told me that they have 1/4% bans on growth going forward into the future, stopping at 1%. They have. I said, well, what happens if there is no growth? If it's negative? Oh, I feel. And he said that would be bad. And they don't have that. They don't even do that sensitivity analysis because they don't understand that energy is the fundamental driver. So the point of this is that all of our institutions and all of our governments are making decisions based on those top lines, and I believe that best case is going to be the purple line. And we are all, as citizens and as ecological economists, going to be facing something like that. IER is where I work, Institute for Integrated Economic Research. It's just a small think tank. I'll get into a little bit of that later. So people are educated about the environment, and we care about the environment. Earth Day, 1970, Bill McKibben's book, 1989, the Kyoto Protocol, 1997. Blue line is actual emissions. This is kind of what John Gowdy and Lucy Kroll talked about yesterday. The hive has overtaken our individual sentiments and behaviors, and we can be well-intended, but we are pursuing, as other natural organisms do, ways to degrade an energy gradient, and we have basically a heck of a lot of pixie dust left that is, for all intents and purposes, magic to us. This is a quote from this morning. The IEA, warning the world is not on track to limit the global temperature increase to 2 degrees. The IEA today urged governments to swiftly enact 4 energy policies that would keep climate goals alive without harming economic growth. That's the big elephant in the room. We have a 17 terawatt engine going constantly 24/7 on the planet, with 85% of it is primary energy. There are some renewables in there, but there is no legitimate discussion that is addressing climate and externalities that also says, and then the growth is going to happen, and what are we going to do about it? This group of people, ecological economists, have been speaking about these things for a long time. So again, it gets down to maximum power principle versus precautionary principle, and all of us are engaged in both sides of that. Here's just a short example of how economy and environment are linked. This is oil product demand for the last 10 years for a variety of European countries. And you can see all with climate and everything that they've done, raising gas taxes and everything. Oil use is about the same for the last 10 years. The bottom countries are the pig countries, Portugal, Greece, and Ireland. And you can notice 2 things. One is, over time, their oil use has started to decline because they can't afford it. The other thing is that the amplitude, the seasonal amplitude, has declined. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you can back into what's happening there. The last 3 years, wood-burning stove purchases have gone up 100% a year in Greece because they can't afford oil, and they're going to wood to heat their homes. The Greek National Guard has been hired to guard the northern perimeter of the forest so people don't go in and chop down trees for fuel. So this is a direct, impact of their economy is broke. They have 70% youth unemployment, and that has a direct, immediate bearing on the environment. The other problem that's not talked about much in our field, and why should it be, because a lot of people don't know this, and I just recently figured it out, is the unbelievable complexity of global supply chains. 40 years ago, where I live in Wisconsin, 90% of the food was grown within 100 miles. Now it's just this enormous Rube Goldberg machine to get food. It's not just the food. We grow plenty of food. It's the packaging and the sanitization, and all these things are made from bizarre micro-components that come from all over the world. And we have grocery stores that have 88,000 items in them. And yes, the market is efficient, has gotten those items there the cheapest way possible, but it also has neglected the fact that we don't need 88,000 items. So in that sense, it's super inefficient. But any discussion about paths forward have to deal with the complete reliance on the hive for globalization and supply chains. So what needs to happen? And this is my opinion. I was once naive to say this is what needs to happen and it will happen, but so I've now just become a philosopher on it. Bill, you know this graph well. Most of you probably do. Clearly, this is where we need to go. Something like this in the red circle. We get decreasing returns from more stuff, and people and other species are going to benefit a lot here. But we need to target something in the red area. How do we get there? Well, my opinion is 3 things need to happen. I think the end of growth is here very soon. I don't expect, I view the world as a probability distribution, and I don't know what's going to happen. Certain things are more likely than others. I think what's happening in Europe and Japan is going to come to America, you know, within the not too distant future. I think for 80 to 90% of people, we just need to have narratives and stories without telling them scary stuff about peak oil and the end of growth and climate change and all that, that can just let them be pro-social and produce a little more, consume a little less, be more reliant, and yes, understand that we are part of a greater story here, and that we have responsibilities, but to bog them down with more and more stress, I don't think is productive. The next thing is this group. 10% of society needs to be the blueprint people that construct what a sustainable society might look like. And I don't know of a discipline other than ecological economics that has put together aspects of human behavior, anthropology, neuroscience, ecosystem, energy and natural resources. You know, you can find this stuff everywhere, but I don't know of anywhere that it's been integrated like here. So I think some sort of blueprint needs to aggressively be done. And then I think maybe 1 or 2% of people need to be motivated somehow to be eco-Jedi. Like a Bill McKibben, I think what he's doing will fail for climate, but he's inspired a lot of other people, and we need somehow to inject people with a sense that I'm not okay if the natural world crumbles, and I'm going to devote my life, or at least my definition of self-worth, to doing something about that. And I don't know what that means, but we need those catalysts out there, and maybe some of them are sitting in the room. So I think ecological economics has a lot of the answers here, and I know it's not it's not a policy arm, and we're not really activists. We're mostly academics, but I think we have a role to play in this. And what are we going to do? That's all I have. Okay, take a few questions before John. Give John more time to write his talk. John.
I just have one quick question. I've been thinking about it. You know, we always talk about economic growth as measure of GDP, and I actually believe GDP is a pretty damn good measure of cost rather than benefits, but it's the measure of economic transactions. So if we did, like, you know, one of these cap and auction schemes, for example, cap, auction, and invest in solutions to the problems. So you suddenly create this huge new, you know, so environmental allowance auctions, we have a huge new layer of economic transactions. And wouldn't that be the way we measure it? Economic growth, a slew, and why I say this is because I think it gives us an option that if we flip away from the debt-based creation of money to a non-debt-based monetary system spent into existence, backed by essentially, you know, environmental auctions, you could have a way to possibly alleviate household debt and green the economy. I'm just, I'm not saying I believe that.
Well, two quick answers to that. Despite the fact that we have a debt problem, everything is still based physically. So GDP, in the end, measures physical transactions, which require energy. So what you're talking about is what I referred to yesterday as Orwellian productivity.
Well, it's actually...
We change the definitions of things, and so things can look on the surface like they're still growing. But what happens is if we have physical processes underpinning this, it gets down to prices and jobs for people. And if we're not consuming as much energy, then there are the fossil slaves get a raise, and the people who are poor are a lot poorer even. So in theory, I can see that. I just don't know the practical.
Well, I was just thinking it's a transition away from a debt-based money system where we still have seniorage to invest in solving these problems. Whereas a shrinking economy, you lose seniorage. But that's a...
How would you start? a transition away from a debt-based
So
system.
it's like a positive money movement, you just eliminate, you know, the 100% fractional reserve.
Fractional
and you
reserve is-
destroy a huge amount. So it doesn't matter, 100% endowed, zero endowed money creation. You eliminate that legally from the banks. Businesses can come up with some
Do you
alternatives.
announce you do that over 5 years, or do you do it overnight? Overnight, and we start by
So
next week.
IMF has already come up with an overnight plan.
Who has?
IMF,
No.
yes.
Not at this level, but-
No, one of the economists at the IMF has come up with But an IMF paper now lays out a very plausible plan that James Robertson and the positive money movement, that's mighty plausible.
Well, I'll have to look at that, but, yes, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say there is, in fact, if you read George Ecological, he actually has stuff right about Negro in a theoretical sense. And he uses concept of fund. If you recall, he talks about inflow in fund and the outflow fund. The inflow, in fact, is negentropy, which is in fact consumption, and the outflow is consumption. And the rate of consumption must at least be less than or equal to the rate of production. And if the rate of production is consumed at a higher rate, then we'll degrowth. It's actually a degrowth situation, literally, because of the second law of thermodynamics. And so I think that the whole issue needs to be focused. And you have to go back to the text of Francesco Rodin. He explains exactly the fact that the entropy law is the law of economics in nature. And we must apply this law now to the economy. And that is, I think, the theoretical basis on which we can start the dialogue.
Who's the we? Because a politician would have cut you off.
Well, I'm part of this movement called Ego.
Okay.
We had our first meeting in Paris, the second meeting was in Barcelona, and we had last year one in Venice. And these are not economists. These are people who are concerned about the issues of growth.
Well, all I can say to that is I agree with you, and one of the most heartening things I see is tons of people, not even this ecological economists, are really passionately trying to figure out what to do. The problem is, if it was a 10% little shift, we would have done it. But it's a 60 or 70% shift, which is why it's so difficult.
Well, I'm going to the USSEE meeting in Lille, in Paris, in France, and I'm flying to Brussels. The next day, we're going to meet people in the European Parliament. And we're going to have a dialogue with the policy and the political people in Parliament, and this is the European Society for Economics.
Well, let me just have one quick comment to that, and then we'll get to another question. We met with the chief science advisor of the UK, agreed with everything we said.
Right.
She said, my hands are tied. The politicians can't. This was the chief scientist. So the scientists, even at the high levels of government, are being watched. Other, go.
Thanks for what you're doing. I'm usually optimistic perspective. We talked about leveling out and stop growing. The world needs a 50% net loss, or net reduction. Is that even in your thinking? I mean, we need to shrink by an enormous amount if we're going to.
We all know that what we're doing is unsustainable. As humans, we have varying degrees of steep discount rates. Some of us care about 20 years from now. Some of us only care about this weekend. Some care about the year 2500. It depends when you talk about a solution what you want to optimize. If you're not worried about climate, and a lot of people in the mainstream are not, then we don't need to shrink 50%. We need to shrink 10%, which is coming no matter what we do. If you're worried about climate, we need to shrink probably more than 50%, because I mean, how much more tons of carbon can we emit? With probably none, if we want to be safe. But that's not going to happen.
80% in the U.S.
Sorry?
It would be 80 or 90%.
Right. So I don't know is the short answer, but I think the more you look at the constraints and all these things, the more you come to those sort of conclusions. And I don't know. Yes, I've thought about that. I mean, for me, you know, I'll be alive 30 more years. The day I die, at that moment, say I die in 30 years, 2043, at that moment, I don't care any more about 2044 or 20,000 years from now. There's 90 billion humans have lived up until this point, give or take, 7 billion alive today. What if our goal should be to have 1 trillion humans alive? Might take 200,000 years, but we're stealing from them right now on ecosystem health and energy grading. Of course, we're kind of evolved to do that, but what about, what's Burlington going to do 100 years from now with energy, and et cetera? I mean, we don't think about those things because we just want to make it through the next 10 years. So one thing that when I talk to people about these things, everyone knows there's something on the horizon. And I like to just say, forget about the next 10 years. Try and visualize what we could be in 2050 or 2100, and then back into it now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say I find it very difficult to think about 50 years from now.
You're not alone.
But, so why not put this in terms of ethics, which I think makes more sense to everybody. Think about what other people see, how other people might think about us as a generation. We are born in their generation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I came to this group, because I read Herman Daly's book. It just spoke to me. So somehow we need to get that narrative of ethics of future generations.
So far, I've seen very little discussion or engagement with the great philosophers, Kant, Marx, you name it. I haven't seen that, and I'm not. I don't want to sound that, but I think this is urgent.
There's something there with ethics, and I found that a lot of people say, yeah, humans will adapt to climate change, and the middle class and the rich will just buy air conditioners, and it'll be the poor that suffer. And I'm like, that's not the issue. Who cares if we have air conditioners and there's only slime molds and algae in the ocean? What kind of life is that? So somehow to inject that we're a caretaker and have fiduciary for all this, but it hasn't worked. There were other questions. Yes?
I'm David Levine from the Center for Sustainable Cities. And I have to say I'm disappointed that I'm one of the people that do the blueprinting for sustainability into the future. And I find, and I also noticed in the brochure that ecological economics posits itself as the science of sustainability. Well, even if that were true, which I don't think it is, it's not enough. There's a whole dimension that would bolster what you're doing if you did it from the point of view of what would it take for people in a community to live sustainably. And there are a lot of, I think, good answers to this. We're going to present one tomorrow morning at this time. This, it seems to me, is a challenge. A number of people here have talked about turning the nested hierarchy diagram upside down, where nature is the control that must be maintained. Society's job is to do what it can do within the boundaries of nature, and economics at the bottom needs to find ways to bolster the system. Of course, right now we're doing it the opposite way around, where economics is controlling our descent into wherever we're going, and can't be solved within economics. And I think the agenda of ecological economics is to pose itself as a contrast to neoclassical economics. The problem with that is that you can't win that. You can't win that direct confrontation battle. It's too strong, too pervasive, and they're running the whole show. I think you would get enormous new energies if you would do what you say you want to do, become a transdiscipline, keeping a good eye on the boundaries of this discipline. Because once you open things up, then you risk chaos. And bring in a number of other fields like sustainable urban design.
question. Who in the room identifies themselves primarily as an academic? Hands, please. Practitioner. Hands, please. Government agency. Did I cover everybody? NGO, that's practitioner. Students. That's academics, right? No? Students. Yes, let's see the students. Okay. Curmudgeons, yeah, curmudgeons. Let's see the hands.
Well, business.
Okay. What's that?
Well, business.
Business. All right.
Problem.
All right. Who sees themselves more on the kind of natural science wing of all these things we talk about? Natural science wing. Who sees
What's that
themselves?
halfway in between?
Do we get a prize depending on how these answers come out?
Hold on. More on the social science wing. All right, good. I'm gonna try my hardest to piss off the social science wing of the crowd here. Where's Deirdre? I saw Deirdre. I owed Deirdre an abstract for a talk like a couple weeks ago, and I sent her a picture instead of the abstract. So what I did this time was just put pictures together for my talk. So thank you. It's my new thing is pictures instead of words. So I want to talk about a not so new vision for ecological economics, building from what Nate had to say, addressing this growth issue a little bit. I don't know if that the title of this session quite fits what I want to talk about, but I want us to talk first and foremost. That I think we're out of time. Who would say that the study of economics, as is taught in most universities across this country and others, is based on faith? It's based on science.
To some extent.
Okay, all right. So I think we're at a moment of faith-based economics, okay? And I think we're starting to recognize that this is faith-based economics. A lot of folks have used those terms in recent years. And I think this conference at this society, Ecological Economics, maybe has a greater shot than most to abandon faith-based economics. Not just like tweak it, not just like, do the 10% thing. Like throw the shit out, right? And do something new that is built on reality. So that's where I want to start. I think
It's based on mathematics.
economics is based on a perversion of mathematics, abstract mathematics, theoretical mathematics. Set up the assumptions so that you know what the conclusion is before you even do the mathematics. That's what economics is. So that's faith-based, right? We'll get there. I think ecological economics has had the opportunity to do this, but it's been sort of stuck in this maze. It's been stuck in this quagmire. Has been trying to, in a way, build itself from a social science foundation instead of a natural science foundation, and I want to talk a bit about that. This is nothing really new. I think what we're seeing at this conference and other places is the movement towards building an economics that is life-serving, right? To borrow a phrase from David Fortin. An economics that's sort of built on the fabric of life and recognizes us as one of many, many species in this fabric of life. And I think faith-based economics is really in the way. What I'm going to talk about is absolutely nothing new. What we're talking about this conference, I'm sorry to say, is absolutely nothing new. My first ecological economics conference, I believe, was in 1996 at Boston University. I don't know, it's same day, different place. I mean, it's all the same stuff. There's some new interesting things, especially on the behavioral side of things that have emerged. But in a way, that sounds like a criticism, but in a way that's good, because I think we keep doubling down on what we know to be true about the economy and how it works and how it functions, and we kind of keep coming back to the same message over and over and over and over and over again. And every 2 years, this society gets together and has the same conversation with very similar people, and maybe that's okay, but that's got to stop at some point. It's got to be new people as well. So what I'm saying is, this is old wine in a new bottle. You've heard this expression before.
New
You've
wine
read
in an old bottle. What's that?
It's new wine in an
Excuse
old
me,
bottle.
yeah, new wine. No, I think it's old wine.
That's
in a
the
new
good,
bottle.
the good stuff.
The good stuff. You know, you've all read a lot of papers, you've written papers on how the roots of an ecological economics really finds itself back to sort of the early classical days of economics, right? And you know, that's very old wine. And so I'm in search of, and I have been in search of, and what drew me to this field was in search of an economics that really had, you know, a moral imperative, right? I mean, Adam Smith did write The Wealth of Nations, but he also wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiment, right? Economics, if you see it as this sort of modern birth in 1776, was always framed with trying to have kind of morality wrapped around this model, this faith-based model of citizens. And of course, an economics that is built on biophysical roots. That's the reason to really sort of bridge the gap between ecological economics and this splintered group of biophysical economics. I mean, biophysical economics is the basis of an ecological economics. It's kind of crazy to sort of call them two different things. They come from the same cloth. So all of these things are a long time coming. In some ways, we don't have to do this from scratch, but in some ways, we do. Quote Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan said to wrote down here, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe, right? And I think that's sort of what we have to do to build an economics that is based on reality and not just faith. You know, we got to think about how to build that apple pie. So, of course, we've talked, and again, for a long time on an economics built in physical laws, right? And then we sort of promptly ignore those physical laws and go out and teach an exchange-based economics, a faith-based economics, an economics that really is a branch of mathematics. We've got to kind of come back to these physical laws and not just state them and then ignore them, but build an economics from these natural laws. We need to come to terms with part of those physical laws are physical beings called Homo sapiens, the third chimpanzee, a social primate, right? We are part of the physical system. We are also constrained by physical laws. And I think some of the sessions you hear here are wrestling with those notions of human nature and the implications on our species and the kind of cultures and societies that we're building. This is all in a way to say, you know, that certainly our biological evolution. You've heard some talks here about our hunter-gatherer roots. Lucy and John talking about our ultra-sociality and the sort of superorganism status that we have now. But, you know, our biological evolution constrains what we can and can't do, right? And our upbringing in small bands of hunter-gatherers says a lot about what we can do in terms of in-group cooperation, but it also says a lot of what we can do with between-group competition. And so this is this sort of balancing act that I think we find ourselves building a new economics built on physical principles, not just on the coal, oil, natural gas side, over in the biophysical meeting, but on the human nature side. So economics is a life science, right? Herman Daly, 1968. Everybody read that paper? Everybody alive back then? Lots of you.
Alfred Marshall, 1890.
Alfred Marshall, 1890. That's even better. Economics is a life science, right? Or economics is a social science. I'm going to contend that the social sciences are an absolute mess, okay? And we would be much better to build an economics built on a life science approach than a social science approach. And that's kind of my jumping point into the actual part of abandoning the rational actor model, right? So we're not Spock. Maybe in the future we'll be Spock. Maybe we'll have some superhuman that is truly Homo economicus. But we talk about this and then we teach it. We talk about abandoning the rational actor model, then we use it in our policy. We talk about abandoning the rational actor model, and then it's the basis for cost-benefit analysis, ecosystem service valuation, everything that we do and what our field has come to be known. But the problem is bigger than just economics. The problem is really at its root the social sciences. It's at its root a kind of model of humanity that with humans at the top of the ladder of nature. I've learned the most about this critique from reading John Gowdy. This kind of presentation that we start with, really, that the whole social science enterprise is built on, of humans made in the image of God. This Judeo-Christian tradition that is a starting point for so much of how we think about humans on Earth. Another problem is treating social sciences as if it were just a branch, an equal branch of the knowledge tree. And you've got a branch that's the social sciences, and a branch that's the natural sciences, and a branch that's the humanities, right? And you can kind of go down either of those branches, and they're all equally valid ways of describing the human predicament. But don't build upon one another very often. That's the central problem of economics. And I think it's even worse than economics because we've sort of gotten into this trap within ecological economics of jumping on the bandwagon of thinking like an economist, built on an outdated version of human nature, built in this social science branch that long ago divorced itself from the natural sciences, built on this idea that if we think like an economist, the big push in economics and in ecological economics is to teach ecologists, psychologists, conservation biologists, economics. If we could only teach the ecologists how to think like economists and use economic valuation tools and use cost-benefit analysis and move to the Spock-based rational actor model, then we could have good economic-based science policy versus good science-based economic policy. So hopefully I've annoyed a good half of you up to this point, maybe especially with this quote here from The Economist. But what I want to start with, the actual part, the kind of academic part of this talk, is to get back to the roots of the question. Josh Farley's great at reminding me this is the question that economists ask, right, of all flavors, of all colors. How to allocate scarce resources toward alternative desirable ends. It traps us, right, and this is right from Herman Daly, it traps us in this kind of middle band, where economics becomes about the allocation question and sort of pushes the scarce resource question off to the sciences and pushes the desirable ends questions off to the humanities and philosophy and ethics. And we only have to worry about allocation. We only have to worry about a particular kind of allocation, market allocation. Therefore, we just got to get the math right to prove that this model is better than all else. That has become the basis of economics, and I fear more and more that's become the basis and the starting point for an ecological economics. What Daly reminds us of as in this call for ecological economics as a transdiscipline is that we've got to build the social sciences on top of the natural sciences, not as an independent branch of the tree of learning, right? And we've got to build the humanities on top of the social sciences, right? And these, in our ethics and our philosophy and our big questions that we ask have to be built on hard-won knowledge down the foundation here, not just alongside it. This is an economics built on the earth sciences. Life science is built on that. Big picture, long time scale social sciences like anthropology built on that. Sociology, political science, economics, behavioral science, neurosciences, ethics, philosophy. What we need in the social sciences is to create more of this sort of hierarchy that we've had for a long time in the natural sciences, right? What we need in the social sciences is what happened in the 1950s in the natural sciences, this sort of this revolution in biology, right? That sort of built a system where higher scales had to pay attention to lower scales, and lower scales, higher scales. And we could imagine an economics that's built on the foundations of all of these kinds of things, and we could imagine a philosophy and an ethics and a neuroscience and behavior built on everything below.
Can you put physics at the bottom?
What's that?
Can you put physics at the bottom?
Earth sciences, physics, geology, throw them all in there. So these, there's lots of disciplines. So this is our trap, right? We immediately say, where's my box? Where's my silo? I'm just throwing a few silos up there. I mean, ultimately, we kind of need a unification of all these things. We need an economics that sort of sees that, what we're in here is to talk about all species, not just us. And In particular, we're talking about social species, so we've heard some great talks around this conference around the sociality of the human species. Us as a social primate, what are those implications? Us within, and there's other social species, not just primates. Lisa and John gave a great talk yesterday about ants, primates, and then we're just this one thing in that big tree of life that I showed earlier of Homo sapiens. We need a kind of economics that is inside this hierarchy that pays attention to these gradations, right? That also sort of recognizes geological time, evolutionary time, biological time, cultural time, political time, communal time, neurological time, chemical, atomic, I don't know, I ran out of times, but you've got all of these sort of ways of thinking about time, right? And physicists might be good at atomic time, and geologists good at geological time. Economists may be somewhere in here, but we're not paying attention to these other dimensions of how and when we make decisions. And of course, scale. From the universe, if I could be so bold, to planetary, continental, national, bioregional, watershed, community, household, individual, brain. We tend to be trapped in these scales. Sometimes we float out to these scales. When we talk about climate change, we get out to these scales. But we're building a multi-scale kind of approach to understanding the economy, embedded, right, in all of these dimensions of time and embedded in all of these various disciplines. In other words, we're looking for consilience, to borrow U.O. Wilson's word from his 1998 book, right? That, to me, you want to talk about blueprint, lays out a blueprint to make the social sciences consilient with the natural sciences, and within that, economics to be consilient with all of these things. But consilient economics, what would that look like? And are there pieces of the puzzle that are in place? Wilson suggests that we look for really exciting, what he calls borderland disciplines, right? Where we're seeing some really interesting marriages, some jumping, some crossing over between the natural sciences branch and the social sciences branch. And again, certainly Wilson would say the natural sciences underpin the social sciences. These bridging disciplines, or these borderland disciplines, we're talking about at this conference. Certainly neuroeconomics, there's a lot of exciting things happening between neurology, the neurosciences, and economics. Economists are finally sort of getting to say, we're true scientists because we're plugging people into functional MRI machines and watching their brains fire and asking them puzzles. And a lot of this being funded by Madison Avenue, right? The marketers throughout their Econ 101 text, guys, like 3 decades ago. Okay? And they aligned themselves with psychology, with the neurosciences, with a deeper understanding of the truth of human nature, not this faith-based rational actor stuff. Behavioral economics, certainly this is the alignment of economics with this broader still study of human nature, psychology, right? And so if neuroeconomics is about the brain, behavioral economics is really about the individual. Institutional economics. I think there are conferences, there are journals, there are all kinds of things happening that are bridging those broader fields within the social sciences, sociology, anthropology, political science, before it got co-opted by economics, that brand of political science. Pulled together with economics to really understand the implications of not just our brains, our wiring, our individuality, but groups of humans, right? Getting closer to that sort of group social primate piece. Experimental economics, if this is the brain, if this is the person, if this is the group, experimental economics is really kind of helping us understand. I actually got these flipped. I meant to put experimental here, groups, institutional here, groups of groups, right? Groups of people trying to work together, really trying to understand the implications of our strong tendencies to cooperate within group, but perhaps an equally strong tendency to compete between group. And what does it mean to kind of create the rules and structures and checks and balances of a social primate? And as we try to strip those away to make a pure economic system based on faith and mathematics, what are we losing in the bargain? And evolutionary economics, most people don't consider evolutionary economics as I would, but I mean, I think of evolutionary economics more as an economics of ultimate cause instead of proximate cause. An economics that doesn't answer the questions up here of how we make decisions, but answers the questions of why we make the decisions that we do, right? Because we were small groups of hunter-gatherers and we got through past bottlenecks, right? Because we cooperated, not necessarily because we competed. Long view economics. And I would put biophysical economics, you know, this is sort of more about the energy basis for all of this stuff, kind of that undergirths a lot of what we're talking about in these various bridging disciplines or borderland disciplines. The challenge for us and the challenge for this conference, and the reason we get so damn frustrated with each other and with our sessions and with our meeting every 2 years and with our journal and where we're going and how we're getting there, we're not moving fast enough, is because we paint ourselves as a trans-discipline, right? That is somehow magically, like nobody else can do, trying to go across all of these layers, all of these time dimensions, all of these scales, right? That we can kind of create a brand of economics that is truly transdisciplinary. That ain't easy, and no one else, certainly within economics, is trying to do that. Lots of interesting things happening here in the borderlands. Very few happening across those borderlands. Lots of interesting things happening on the behavioral side. Very few on the sort of biophysical side. I would say ecological economics still is sort of the home of the biophysical critique that you don't find in these other sort of blending of the social sciences and the natural sciences. So, to me, this whole story and everything we do here and everything we discuss comes back to these central questions of the fitness of human nature, and that's where I'll end, right? How we got into the binds that we have, both in the past, present, and anticipated in the future. And how do we get out of them? And are we going to do this based on a kind of worldview that seeds us with the rest of life on the planet, or as something that was created in the image of God and the Judeo-Christian tradition that is somehow separate from the rest of life on the planet, right? That has its own laws, that writes them with the script of mathematics, right? And we're just so damn smart that we're separate from the rest of life. And the kind of blank slate theories of the social sciences, right? That we're born with a blank slate. Everything is culture and nothing is biological. Where do we fall in between? And again, I'll borrow from Wilson for a whole slew of categories of how social psychology, evolutionary psychologists, sociobiologists, whatever you want to call them, really study the implications of and are looking for those kind of big picture questions around the fitness of human nature. And if you think of a number of categories of how we're doing this with social insects, with other primates, and with ourselves, the most narrow is kin selection, right? So going up to parental investment, what are the implications of kind of our biological underpinnings of parenting on how we behave, how we structure society, how we build an economy. Mating strategy. This is a really important touchy-feely area of looking at all kinds. I'll give you some examples. Status-seeking behavior, that's a big part of our sociality and us as a social primate. Territorial expansion and defense. And finally, contractual agreement. Let me just take these one at a time. Kin selection. This is where we feel very comfortable studying other species and talking about kin selection and talking about group selection and talking about the processes that underpin the biological processes, the evolutionary tracks that underpin how we arrange hierarchies, bureaucracies, group behavior. And this is a lot about predictions of altruism, patriotism, ethnicity, inheritance rules, adoption practice, infanticide. Trying to understand the implications of this big behavioral group within the human species on the design and function of economic systems, I think, is up to us if we're truly going to take this transdisciplinary approach. Parental investment has led to some really great work on biologically based theories of the family, much of which is quite controversial and it pushes and pulls with all kinds of insights on sex ratios, marriage contracts, parent-offspring conflict, child abuse. This is sort of, this deeper understanding of our biological impulse is a big part of how we behave and structure and ultimately define our economic systems. Mating strategy, predicting patterns of mate choice and courtship. We're happy to do that when we study chimpanzees or bonobos or orangutans, but when we turn that lens upon ourselves, it's like, whoa, 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 hold on. But this really gives us some deep, deep time understanding of human nature and helps us understand the fitness of human nature in a world with plenty of energy for a long period of time to completely destroy the planet. Status-seeking behavior. In traditional society, genetic fitness has something to do with the relationship to status. What is the modern equivalent? Nate has done a lot of writing about conspicuous consumption and trying to understand the sort of biological underpinnings of a consumer-based society, consumerism, right? We're not going to do that with this kind of outdated model of humanity separate from the rest of nature. It's going to really require a deeper understanding of human nature based on evolutionary biology. Territorial expansion and defense. What are our instincts that sort of get our hackles up? Those territories, even in academia that we call disciplines and that we call silos, of those territories between ecological economics and biophysical economics, for God's sakes. We're working on the same damn things, but we've somehow created silos even within our community. And then finally, contractual agreement. This is a huge, important area of human behavior, right? We've got a long history of creating checks and balances and system of trust and detection of cheaters and the building of social norms, right? And somehow we strip all that away in the rational actor model, and then we've started to build an ecological economics based on that stripping that ignores a lot of the implications of how we got to here we are today. I always say to my students, and they think I'm crazy for saying it, but one thing I hope you remember from this talk is that we are related to our ancestors. We didn't get here just sort of on our own. We got here because of past decisions that were made, because of contracts and agreements that were made, because of how the computer on our top of our neck here was wired. And though if we ignore those implications, I think we ignore them at our peril. So I think this not so new vision of ecological economics is about building a study of humanity that is based on placing us in the context of all life, not on the top of the ladder of nature. I think it's based on a study of morality that's rooted in physical processes of the physical brain, and we can get into debates about the brain and the mind, but the neurosciences has really blown wide open the demand side, the behavioral side of economics, and I think we tend to ignore that in ecological economics, and we probably do so at our peril. I think it's based on a model that really tries to find lessons that draw from our cooperative behaviors and how the human species has gotten through past bottlenecks, maybe not so much through competition, but through cooperation. Now, of course, as we've grown to a global species, as our group size has gone from maybe 80, 90, 100 size group on the African savanna to a group of 7 billion. This is sort of our central challenge, right? How do we behave as a group that is on one planet and doesn't have resources over the next horizon? And ultimately, I think that we're building an economics that is a life science, right? An economics that's built on the fabric of the natural sciences, not an economics that's in this isolated branch of the tree of knowledge that is developed called social sciences. Thank you. In case you didn't know, our third speaker is not here today, so Nate and I took a little liberty of taking some extra time. Yes?
The question is, how do you inject this theory into the mainstream right now? Is it taking the George Clooney less is more approach? Is it policy? I mean, what's the, if you were to choose a strategy
Sure,
or
sure.
multiple strategies,
Sure.
tell me how to go out there right now and inject this.
So, I'll give you a long view strategy and a short view strategy. Long view strategy is if you look at our politicians, they're all educated in economics and political science, the two most popular majors in the academy, right? They've never, very few of them have sort of burdened themselves with science-based education. This is a problem. This is a huge problem, right? So long view strategy is that we need economics, political science, sociology, we need all those students starting with the sciences, building a much more complicated, so a much more like complex social science that's built on the fabric of natural science. Now that's not a quick solution, right?
Education, you're saying, sorry.
That piece, yeah. The quicker solution though, right, is, I mean, I look at, you're saying Bill McKibben's approach isn't going to take us very far, and I probably agree because of all this human nature stuff. But we need to be out there bashing this over folks' heads, like the biophysical realities of the buying network. I think Bill McKibben's Do the Math tour was absolutely brilliant, right? And as much as I think the divestment movement is going, maybe going nowhere, I also think that that's the greatest test, in a sense, of ecological economics and of our generation, to actually see if we can force profit-making companies to leave carbon in the ground. That's what everyone says that we have to do. That's what we have to do now, you know, and that's way more than just sort of educating politicians about science. That's a movement, that's a revolution, that's getting out there. So we're having that conversation right here at UVM right now about divestment. And I gotta tell you, I'm right in the middle of it, because I'm in my new dean role, I'm out there raising money, right? And I've got investors saying, I will not give you money unless you put it in a fossil fuel-free account.
Really?
And I've got investors saying, I will not give you money if you divest, because that's not your fiduciary duty. You know, the high return stocks are fossil fuels, blah, 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 and I try to show them that's not true, but I try to show them to invest in the future, and I try to tell them that I'm in the classroom, my faculty in the classroom, talking about leaving carbon in the ground, and then we're looking the other way and put money into our 401ks that's trying to get carbon out of the ground as fast as we possibly can. So as much as I've heard divestment as just this sort of myopic kind of thing, I think it's a huge test for us in the academy. It's a huge test for our discipline of ecological economics. It's a huge test for sort of moving to a model that's not concerned just simply with the highest rate of return in this faith-based economics. Oh, wow. Where should I go? Okay, mathematics, let's hear it.
Okay, yeah, well, I think that I like your holistic approach in your recognition of activity, but I think there's a missing piece in this argument. And it goes back to the question of formalisms.
I'll repeat it. Go ahead.
It goes to the question of formalisms. How do we bring, because we're a discipline, and we're teaching students to understand what the problem is.
Yep.
And the best methodology for doing that is logic, is the formalistic approach to understanding why things happen the way they do. And that is a very important element. That's the reason the classical economists have been so successful, because they have a superb body of formalisms.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there. So logic, formalism, great. That helps us frame theories. But then we gotta test the theories, right? We can't have a science built on unfalsifiable hypotheses,
Absolutely
which is
correct.
what economics is built on. Okay?
Well, that I disagree with.
So logic, formalism, math, that is a wonderful way of organizing our thoughts and framing theories. But then we got to go out there and actually test these things. And if they're unfalsifiable hypotheses, then that doesn't, to me, doesn't meet the standard of science. We should throw it out.
Absolutely agree with 100%. That is the issue. Because
Yeah.
the social sciences, we are, in the natural sciences, you take a hypothesis, you test it, you test your theory, and it proves correct, and then someone overthrows it, right, by another test, another methodology. The social scientists don't have that capacity. We don't have laboratories. We cannot test things. So we observe. And our observation tool is statistics and data. And that's what we observe. And then,
So I think you're conflating a sort of logic-based, faith-based economics with an empirical-based economics, where we use stats, we use math, we use all those tools that are supposed. Applied economics has good stuff in it, but economists should be the sort of technicians of the economy, not the rulers of the world, right? That's the difference. Economist as technician, I'm trained as an economist, I'm happy to be called a technician, right? Versus economist is framing how the world works and how it should work. I want to get to other questions, so we'll talk some more. I got to hear from Brian. It's here.
Well, I don't know where to start. Going back to the political advancement of ecological economics, I'm afraid the starting point of your talk is kind of a political non-starter, the faith-based economics
Okay,
phrase.
this session was theoretical consideration, so
Well, okay, but his question was.
this is not a practitioner session.
Yeah, well, his
I
question.
hear you completely.
Faith connects with a hell of a lot of people around the planet. And if you want to deprecate that, I think that's just going to piss a lot of the masses, so to speak. So maybe.
So that's been this tension, right, between science and the humanities, science, and right, is this sort of this, and that's the tension of like E.O. Wilson's whole body of work, right? When he says things like it's the job of the sciences to turn as much philosophy into science as possible, right?
But I think in faiths, like major religions, there are traditions that are very protective of nature. And, I think
Notice
that
I tried to
comes
keep
overlooked
saying
a lot.
Judeo-Christian traditions, because I do think there are some very good holistic traditions out there that aren't as arrogant as some of the tradition that I was raised out there. Look, I was raised Roman Catholic, so all of this is about purging my guilt, right? my whole career. So, when I landed in college and I took my first evolutionary biology class, I called up my mom and I was like, Mom, what the? Like, why didn't I learn this in high school? Why didn't we talk about this in Sunday school? And it was this sort of revelation for me. And I honestly think if we continue to sort of treat, I hear what you're saying. We got to align ourselves with faith groups, but at the same time, we got to move away from a faith-based economics, right? We got to align ourselves with a group that's saying they need to be good stewards.
Choice. Pick something else besides myth.
I'm amongst friends, so I wanted to sort of be a little bit instigating. Tom?
Just building on this a little bit, not that long ago, there was a movement called Evolution Across the Curriculum. Faculty from across were trying to do, at that time, the Chronicle of Higher Education article, lead article said less than 30% of college students believed in evolution by this different surveys. Just slightly more than 60% of faculty at colleges and universities at that time. The members of the faculty of the Senate and House who would agree to the survey came in at the same rate as the college students, less than 30%. So I mean, those numbers are slightly higher than the number of people who think that humans have something to do with causing climate change. I mean,
it's an uphill battle. I couldn't agree more. If we go about building an economics that claims is built on biophysical principles, that is claims that's built on the natural sciences, which long ago sort of adopted evolutionary biologists as a central fabric that holds these various hierarchies together. We got to be pushing for that, in my humble opinion, despite the odds that show that most entering freshmen know nothing like I did entering school, nothing about evolutionary biology, nothing about theory of natural selection. Believe that I was sort of made in the image of God, and it was up to me to sort of have dominion over the earth. That is a central problem of the social sciences. It's a central problem of economics. If we don't address that, if we don't put that up front, if we don't talk about it, what we're doing right now, and I hear your criticism loud and clear, Brian, the way I'm talking about it is confrontational. Good, right? In this room with these people at this conference, if we don't talk about these kinds of things, what hope is there, for God's sakes? There's my language. There's my upbringing. Nico, yes sir, behind Brian.
Thanks.
Can you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Okay, my name is Marwan Imshada. Well, the problem with introducing ourselves is that we get situated within certain boxes.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And that's what I'm
Name
trying
is good.
That's what I'm trying to avoid. But I am from the School of Natural Resources and Environment at the University of Michigan. So my identity, I could be an ecological economist when I feel it's convenient to be so. I could be an anthropologist when I feel comfortable claiming that identity. But here I would respond to one of the few things you said at the beginning, that is you want to annoy the social scientists. And I will just push back a little bit and ask you some broader questions. So when talking about faith-based economics and science-based economics, so that's based on an assumption or an understanding that there is faith and there is science and the two are different. Do we all agree to that? So that would be the first question.
It's a great question.
The other question would be, we are all trying to understand the human behavior and what drives people to act in the way they do. And we all understand that faith motivates a lot of behavior.
Yeah.
So in claiming that we want economics to be more science-based,
Let me use faith in a different way that separates it from the image Leonardo da Vinci's images. Okay? Let me use faith in a different way. The title of this session has something to do with economic growth, right? So let me use faith in a different way. We talk about it this session, we write about it in the journal, I've read countless books from folks in this crowd and throughout this meeting, especially the work of Brian Check, that economic growth, okay, is an impossibility and conflicts with environmental conservation. We built an economic system that fundamentally depends upon economic growth. That's really what I mean about faith-based. We've built a faith that we can continue to grow the economy, and therefore we can borrow against that growth, we can draw down assets against that growth, and somehow it's all going to work out because of a faith in technology, because of a faith in human innovation, because of faith, and ultimately a Star Trek faith that we're going to, launch ourselves into the universe and exploit new planets as we outgrow our own home. So maybe that's a more comfortable notion of faith than this other piece of faith, which I purposefully did, that ties us to this image of religion, and that we can kind of not worry. Okay, again, Roman Catholic belief system here, right, that I grew up in, that somehow if we fuck things up, no problem, we can go and atone for our sins and everything will be fine. Did that answer your question? Josh?
So just really quickly, I think one of the big differences, though, between the social sciences and the natural sciences is that our theories in a social science have a profound impact on outcomes. No matter what Tom thinks about physics, it's not going to affect the laws of physics. But what we say is the fact about an economic system, maybe even just the fact when we train economists, we change their behavior in a way that changes their actions that has an impact on the system. And
That's a great point.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. I really like your talk.
So our belief system, it's one of these self-fulfilling prophecies,
exactly.
Right? We believe in the following, therefore it happens.
And George Soros calls it
strengthens that belief system.
Yeah, and it's a positive feedback loop, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
But we.
Yeah, because I struggle with my language when I talk about the laws of thermodynamics, and they say this is not possible, and then I think, well, we're doing it, aren't we? But we're doing it only until we actually finally run up against those laws, right? Until we can
ideology.
So, what I took from Nate's talk is can we build the steady state economy or the degrowth economy by design or by default? The laws say that eventually we're going to hit the walls and there's nothing we can do about it, right?
Yeah.
This conference is about designing it, to come back to your point, right? How do we design it? Yeah. Any of you guys?
Just for the historical record, long before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and long before he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he wrote an essay on the history of astronomy. And so not only was he trying to fit, the chaos of markets in.
Old wine, man. Old wine in a new bottle.
Right.
Yeah.
But he also asked the question, why do humans theorize? And to address Carlos, that's the part where David Hume came in, where we try to theorize to put things in nice boxes, to get rid of the wholly unpleasant sentiments and emotion of wonder and surprise. And so economics, I know we change behavior, but it's a discipline where everybody pays homage to Adam Smith, but they've never ever read what he has to say. And if they have, it's been 2 books of the wealth of the economy, not to tweak neoclassical economics, but to be able to look more fully at systems and feedback loops. And the third part for Brian,
Systems ecology.
yeah, but also heterodox political economy, and tries to meld those two. And then second, it
I
was
couldn't agree with you
Lisi
more, but
and John
but talk
Gowdy
to
and
the
myself,
silverback about that.
and Charlie, that came up with the title, The End of Faith-Based Economics, and just for edification, it appeared in a religious journal. It appeared in a theoretical journal of the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility. So,
All right, I'm going to jump to this side of Bill.
Here's a proposition, I just want to
Ask-
build on it. Human beings are an evolved species, and like every other evolved species, we have 2 qualities. The first is that we will expand to fill all available habitat. That's a natural predisposition, and it's just part of our nature that we've been talking about. And we're the most successful species on the planet in occupying habitat that's potentially occupiable. In fact, we live in places now that are uninhabitable because we supply to trade. The second quality that we have with all other species is that we will use up all the accessible resources. The difference is that accessibility for human beings is defined by technology. So the frontier of accessibility is constantly growing as we get better and better at mining and digging and all of that kind of stuff. So what we've done as a, by the way, biologists would classify us as a cage strategist species, one that is always going to be pressing up against its carrying capacity.
Depends on which biologist you talk to. There's just
Well,
as many who call us an
I'm
arsenic.
looking at the empirical evidence of the human species in every habitat that it's occupied on the planet through history. It will live until it presses up against its carrying capacity.
Let me just push back on that,
Just
because,
what
okay.
we've done in modern times is remove the negative feedback. So the qualifier is, unless or until constrained by negative feedback, human beings will expand to fill all available habitat and use up all resources. Now, if you remove the negative feedback, disease, resource shortages, and so on, we will expand exponentially, which is exactly what we did in the 19th century when oil came into play, giving us access to all the resources we needed to, in fact, realize our full biological potential. So the growth economics has a biological basis which cannot necessarily be overridden by naive social science. We've got to socially construct a completely alternative paradigm that in effect substitutes for the negative feedback that is normally found in nature, so that we impose social constraints on the biological predispositions to continue to grow and expand and consume everything in sight. Until we cross that boundary, we're going
So
nowhere.
that last thing on the list, contractual agreement. And that's right, I'm spending a good part of my research is understanding the kind of biological impetus for contractual agreement to ask those kinds of questions of whether we can pull it off as a global tribe, right? I'm going to push back and say that I think the evidence is that we are our selected species, that we overshoot and collapse. When you look at our past, right? Time and time and time and time and time and time again, when we were stuck on an island or stuck on a small space, we couldn't get off, right? We couldn't move to the next horizon. We couldn't go in the Kenneth Boulding spaceship, cowboy economy, right? We overshot and we collapsed.
That's case selection.
No, that's our selection.
No.
Yeah, case selection is when you come up to your carrying capacity and you sort of.
And collapse. Back
No.
to,
case not for
look,
carrying
our
capacity.
selection is.
Well, we can talk about that. We can debate it later,
You
but
have
it,
to look up the definition of it.
Elephants.
Case selection is long-lived, large species with low reproduction rates but high inference.
Mosquitoes are-
That's the human archetype.
Nate, did you want to? You thought a lot about our selection, case selection. Keep on going.
I'll just say a 30-second comment briefly. We talk about our evolution of cooperation and competition between groups, within groups. And I sometimes ask myself, what if the group is n equals 1? One is just yourself.
Exactly.
And so in all this, I notice my own behavior when I'm not around people and I don't have to impress other people or conform or whatever. And I've decided I have to live my life that when I die, I look back and I was a hero to myself. I at least did the right things. And I'm not saying that everyone can do that, but that's the conclusion I've come to facing what we have. Bob, you had a question.
Yeah, Bob, Aaron.
I want to agree with Bill Rees. I think there's one faith-based aspect that is built into your attempt to get rid of the faith-based, and that is a faith in a particular kind of human, which acts the way we think, but doesn't act the way we act. Energy tax.
Ah,
Really? That's how you bring the negative back.
yes.
So just to build a little that, I think the word you're looking for rather than faith, because I see nothing wrong with faith and some business side or things of dynamics. You want to call it faith.
Yeah, we can get into a debate about science, it's just another way of
I
knowing.
think it's more productive to call it cynical. The other than cynical economics.
Cynical economics.
Or fantasy, I don't know.
Fantasy. I like that. Fairy tale. Fairy tale economics. Okay.
How about the word ideology?
Yeah,
Yes.
And a political question, why is it so dominant? It's been disproven and disproven and
Well, I
disproven.
think in part it comes back to what Bill just said.
But
Like growth
use
economics has done what it was supposed to do. Grow.
Well, and use the word ideology instead of faith. Go with that. I mean, what do you think?
I sometimes use that ideology. In homage to Charlie's article and others, I thought faith-based economics would stir things up, and I was right. I'm going to stop there. I'd love to take some more one-on-one. We're right at our coffee break time, and we did start on